A new chapter for Spotify, the latest from Podnews.net with Magellan AI, helping you build your podcast ad plan. We start with an exclusive today. Spotify appears to have enhanced chapter support within the Spotify Podcasts app. Nick Ivanov, founder of Visi, notes that there's a new chapters section in an episode page and chapter marks and titles within a new player, which is rolling out both to iOS and Android. There are pictures in our newsletter today. However, Spotify isn't supporting either ID3 embedded chapters nor chapters via the new podcast namespace. Instead, Spotify uses timestamps in the episode description, much like YouTube. Anyway, you can see those chapters in action on Spotify in the Decorating by the Book podcast, which Visi has helped build. Libsyn's AdvertiseCast report that December's average podcast advertising rate was $23.57. That's a drop of 4% month on month. The company's release also gives an average cost per thousand rate in 2022, which was 2.4% higher than 2021. If you're with Deezer, there's been a data breach at the French-owned podcast and music service. It affects 229 million accounts. Have I Been Pwned has sent out notifications today, along with Firefox Monitor. Your data's probably compromised even if you only use the service to add your podcast there. The Earbuds Podcast Collective this week looks at game show podcasts. Meanwhile, Podcast Brunch Club has a collection of shows this month about movies. And Podcasting the Game, a free board game from the podcast host, has had an expansion pack built for it with all kinds of additional challenges. In podcast news, I Know Dino, the Big Dinosaur podcast, is celebrating its 8th year of big dinosaur podcasting. Garrett and Sabrina tell us, we started the show as two enthusiasts who had a dinosaur-themed wedding and then started a podcast because we didn't want to stop talking about dinosaurs. Now, 8 years later, we both work on the podcast full-time. The Letterboxd show is launching Best in Show, a look at the noms and gongs from this cinema awards season. They chat with contenders, look back at snubs and surprises through cinema history, and shine a spotlight on the magnificent films from the past year that can get lost in the noise. Also in our newsletter today, a billboard from Australian radio and podcast app listener at a station in Melbourne in Victoria, and the last 2 weeks of headlines. This podcast is sponsored by Magellan AI. Every month, Magellan AI work out the top spenders in podcasting, as well as those making big moves in their podcast ad budgets. Who will be December's top advertisers? Be the first to find out in their free webinar. You can register now at magellan.ai. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.